Hi, I'm Marie Samuels, and welcome to the April edition of Macabre Moments. You might notice that Crypto Sabi Eric Altman is not with me today. Unfortunately, due to some scheduling conflicts, he will not be able to join Macabre Moments for the next few months, but we have high hopes that he will be back in the very near future. Now, my guest, Tim Yancey, got that joke. Hi, Tim.
Hey,
Thank you so much
yeah, I
for
got
being on the
that one.
show. Tim Yancey was one of the commentators on the recent shock doc done by Discovery Plus.
Mhm.
And remind me the title again. Shock doc, the
It's
Amityville
called
Evil,
Shock Doc's Amityville Horror House. It was the
Amityville Horror
second one of
House.
the series.
And the first one was.
The first one was a documentary about Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I think it's actually entitled Ed and Lorraine Warren. I worked with them a little bit on that one, but it was all behind the scenes stuff, just kind of providing some materials and things for that documentary.
Right, right. So let's start with the Ed and Lorraine one. Just touch on it a little bit. What
Sure.
information were you able to provide?
Well, I got an email out of the blue one day from a company called 1895 Films, and they're based in Los Angeles and North Hollywood, California. And they said that they were creating these new series for Discovery Networks, and they were doing a paranormal documentary series, and it was going to be unlike anything we had ever seen before. The first one was on Ed and Lorraine Warren. Second one was on Amityville, and they wanted to know, did I have any materials, because they had seen some of the lectures and conferences that I've done about Amityville, and they wanted to know if I had any good stuff, interview stuff, tapes, films, videos of things that George had done, and they had done their homework because they had apparently seen a lot of the videos from my conferences, and they knew that I just had tons of stuff of George Lutz talking about Amityville. George was a very dear friend of mine for a number of years, and we went out on the road and we went around the country doing talks about the paranormal because we're both violent haunting survivors. And during those times, when we weren't speaking, we were back at the hotel room or doing something, we'd bust out tape recorders and video cameras and stuff, and I would ask George questions about Amityville. What happened? Um, through that, I amassed quite a collection of George Lutz archives, and they were able to use those for the show.
Yeah, here at Macabre Moments, we can't seem to get enough of the Lutz. Um,
Yeah.
Everybody wants to know, what was what was really going on with the Lutzes, and I think that you're one of the few out there that can give us some insight into, was everything that they claimed that happened in Amityville, the 28 days that they were there, did that all actually happen? Was some of it embellished? I do know that there was some controversy over a recorded conversation between the Lutzes, the Warrens, and Jay Anson, I believe, or it was their lawyer.
It was Paul Weber.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that would be my first question: is
Okay.
did George ever deviate from any of the claims of what occurred in the 28 days that they were in the Amityville house?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
think initially, there's a great line that stands out on, I think it was the Merv Griffin show, when they were asking Kathy about that. What was your decision? What made you decide to come out and talk about this story? And Kathy said, well, before we could do it, some people went out there and did it for us. Those people were Paul Weber, who was the defense attorney for Ronald Defeo. And here's how it happened. George and Kathy Lutz wanted to speak with Paul Weber because they felt, after their experiences in Amityville, that something affected them, and whatever that thing was had to be affecting Ronald Defeo Jr. too on the night that he committed those murders. And they really thought that it would be a serious injustice for him to sit in jail and not have a chance at some sort of psychotherapy, some sort of therapeutic, investigation to find out, was there something in the house that could have caused this to happen? So they reached out to Paul Weber. Paul Weber responded back, and they began to talk about this case of what happened with Ronald versus what happened with George. Over time, Paul Weber approached them and said, there's a real good possibility that we could do a book deal on this and get some movies going and get, garner some attention around this. He talked with them and presented this really ridiculous contract to them, saying that, if they talked about it, that he would gain the house back, he would get the house if they didn't participate the way that he wanted them to participate, and that a portion of any of the proceeds that was written in this book that they were going to write, some of those proceeds would go directly to Ronald Defeo Jr. He would get a cut, so to speak. So in the initial talks with Paul Weber, there was a tape that was made, and I think they recorded about 40 hours of cassette tape. And George told me about it, and he says, this is something I'm not really proud of. But him and Paul Weber started to theorize and talk about how they could embellish the story, how they could make it a little bit more scarier, and this type of thing. Eventually, George and Kathy Lutz decided this isn't how we want to do this. This is not the road that we want to travel. And so they began looking for their own opportunities to tell their story. And that's when they hooked up with Jay Anson, and the book, The Amityville Horror, came out.
Now, I'm really glad that you brought up Kathy Lutz pointing out that there may have been a connection between what happened with Ronald Defeo and what happened with the Lutzes. And that was going to be my next question for you, was did George Lutz believe that what happened to the Lutzes could have been what influenced Defeo, Ronald Defeo Jr., to do what he did? Could it have been one and the same, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was convinced of that. For people who don't know the story, there was a family in Amityville named Ronald Defeo. Him and his family lived at the house at 112 Ocean Avenue prior to the Lutzes, about a year, 13 months before they had moved in. Now, Ronald Defeo, the senior, always felt and said to his neighbors and to people that were friends of his that he had the devil on his back. He ran a car dealership that was actually owned by Ed Brigante, which was the grandfather. And when he was working there, Ronald Defeo, in an argument about 6 months before the murders happened, pulled a rifle, aimed it at Ronald Defeo Sr., and pulled the trigger. He was going to kill him. Absolutely, in the house. The gun misfired. It didn't go off.
Oh, my.
From that point, a lot of people don't know this background with the Defeo family.
Right.
From that point on, he went to Canada. He visited a monastery up there, and he had these statues made. And they were statues of saints of the Holy Family, of the Virgin Mary, and he had those placed in his yard. And people would see him praying to these statues out in his yard. He had these huge pedestals made for him. No easy feat for this. And people say, what's going on? And he'd say, I have the devil on my back. And they would see him praying the rosary out there with those statues. That was 6 months before the murder. The night...
You're talking about Senior is doing this. Ronald Defeo Sr., the father.
He knew that something was wrong. He knew that there was something wrong in the house. And, he went to Canada and had these statues made. He became pretty religious all of a sudden. Now, Ronald Defeo testified in court that on the night of the murders, he was in this TV room and he was watching a particularly violent documentary called, I think it was Castle Keep, like a war documentary, real horrific, especially the last few moments of it. And at some point he fell asleep. He awoke to find a female figure in black, not not like black clothing, but just kind of a void, like you hear about like shadow people, just a solid black object.
Like a
And that she
silhouette.
was, yeah. And she was standing there. She had thrust the rifle into his hands and told him to commit the murders. Ronald Defeo testified to that in court, and he testified that that shadowy figure moved with him from room to room as he committed the murders. Ronald Defeo, his wife Louise, and the kids were all shot point blank 35 caliber Marlin rifle. That night, there was a rainstorm, and only one neighbor said that he heard anything, and that was the dog barking. No one in the house heard the gunshots. That nobody woke up. They were all found laying in their beds in the exact same position, laying down on their stomachs with the right leg slightly raised, kind of elevated up a little bit. And he testified that he moved from room to room. He said, once it started, I just couldn't stop. I could not stop. I was out of control. So initially, when the police arrived on the scene, he had left the house, gone drinking at a bar that day. And when he came back home and he acted like, oh, my parents are shot, my family's dead, he ran back to the bar, got everybody, they all ran back to the house. At first, they put Ronald in protective custody, thinking that this was a hit, a mob hit or something, because there's rumors that they may have been involved with some organized crime contacts through the car dealership.
Right.
They put him in protective custody. They started asking him questions. And then while they were doing the investigation in the house, they found that box that held that 35 caliber Marlin rifle. Now, it was an empty box. He had taken all the bullets and the rifle, threw the rifle in the river.
Right.
And the other stuff was deposited into a storm drain down the end of the street. So,
and that was recovered.
yes, all those items were recovered. They brought him in. They started to question him and questioning, and they caught him in a couple of little slips. And then finally he confessed that he had committed the murders and that the shadowy figure had made him do it.
Now, I forgot what I was going to say, but it had something to do with Defeo and Lutz. Dang it. Good thing this is live, right?
There are commonalities. There's a lot of people said they looked alike.
Well,
with the beard.
There's a couple shots, depending on the angle, where Defeo looks a lot like Lutz, or Lutz looks a lot like Defeo. Have you seen the trailer for the new not Annabelle movie, but the Conjuring movie, The Devil Made Me Do It?
No.
Okay. Oh, you gotta watch that trailer.
But I have not actually. I haven't seen The Conjuring yet, and I know Andrea and the Perone family, but I haven't seen it yet. Me and my wife have been holed up, waiting for the coronavirus thing to end, and I don't get out much.
Well, you can watch it on your own TV at home, right?
This is true.
Yes.
You gotta understand something. I am a violent haunting survivor. Okay.
Right.
So I tend to be very careful the things that I give my attention to, the things that I put my energy into. And a lot of times it's not the television shows that are out there or some of the horror movies, because that can create situations sometimes.
I can kind of relate to that a little bit. So I get where you're coming from. But I recently saw the trailer, and what spoke to me in the trailer was they show a clip of the gentleman that plays Ed Warren, and he's testifying in court, and he's saying, you acknowledge the existence of God every time someone swears in as a witness. It's time that we acknowledge the existence of the devil.
Sure. Absolutely.
And it appears that this is a case that they're handling where a possessed individual committed a crime while they were under possession, similar to the theory with Ronnie Defeo Jr. And they're trying to present that in a court of law as he was under the influence of a demonic entity. He was not acting under his own, choice or mind or whatever. So I just thought that was really interesting as well. That the Warrens, and I did watch the documentary about the Warrens, which I thought was fabulous. Um,
Mm,
I got a whole new respect for the Warrens after I watched that documentary.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it really painted them in a very good light.
sure.
Is I've been a little skeptical about the Warrens. I'm not going to lie. I've interviewed a lot of people that have worked with the Warrens, and I've heard good and bad. Um, but I digress. The reason we're here is because I want to get into the mind of George Lutz through you, just like that documentary did. So when
Hmm.
you and George would travel around, did he talk about things that happened at Amityville?
Yeah. Yeah, George is somebody that my family reached out to in the Lutz family when we were experiencing crazy stuff going on in this house. And he was very kind, him and Kathy, and even the children, the kids now that I've made acquaintance with. And they have we sit and chat for hours. And it's not always about what happened in the house, but what are the commonalities that happen in violent hauntings? What are the catalysts that create this environment for these dark things to happen? And what did you do to alleviate the haunting and the things that were happening to you? In George's case, they bailed out and moved across the country as far away as they could get. And even then, there was a little bit of a half-life to this thing. So for people who are experiencing these violent hauntings and stuff, we tend to be a little, like I said, I don't watch a lot of the paranormal stuff that's out there because there can be repercussions from that. But George was somebody who often talked about Amityville. And we kidded around quite a bit. I said, all right, George, I'm going to do a 5-year investigation and I'm going to find out all the lies. I'm going to expose all the BS. And he's like, okay, go ahead. You'll be about the 412th one that has said that they're going to do this. And he would answer any question that I had. At any point, I would say, George, did this happen? Did that happen? How do you feel about this and that? And at the same time, we were making recordings for this. The idea was to put together a film about Amityville that allowed the family, the Lutz family, to even tell one day of their story because everybody else was doing it for them. They had a
Right.
book that was written by somebody else, movies that were written by somebody else, and they had not had that opportunity yet. So that's what we were doing. And I had all of George's personal photographs, um, home movies, investigation photographs from the Warrens on March 16th when they went into the house. I got to meet people who were there. Ed, Lorraine Warren, Mary Downey, or Mary Pascarella. Quite a few people that had been there. Jerry Sullivan.
The
Go ahead.
psychic seance you're talking about.
Yes, the people that
It
Ed
just,
had brought.
I know you saw me react because you said that happened on March 16th.
I may be wrong with my date, but I want to say it was March 6th,
Okay.
1976.
I was going to say, because
Yeah.
Ronald Defeo passed this year on March 12th.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
And
I had
I
to go
think
back
that
and look.
I think it was March 6th. Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't looked at this stuff in a while, so my apologies.
No worries,
Some
no
of this
worries.
is still a little fuzzy.
Um, before I got on the line with you, I was thinking, I was like, Ronald DeFeo Jr. died in March. Wouldn't it be just an absolute trip if it was the 15th? Because he said it was at
Right.
3:15 is when that, I think
Oh, yeah, I see.
but he
Yeah.
actually died on 3/12, which that's only 3 days or 3 minutes depending on how you look at it, right?
Hmm.
So I thought that was a little compelling as well. It almost kind of ties together a little bit. Maybe at 3:12
Well,
was when he was handed the gun, and
I can show you.
3:15.
I can show you something interesting. You're talking about commonalities with dates. Um, this is my Amityville Horror book, and this is the book that I had that caused us to reach out to the Lutz family. This is an old book,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of the people that I have met along the way have signed it, directors of movies and things like that, including George Lutz. And George signed it. I don't know if you can see this right up at the top here.
Yeah. My
That's his
friend.
signature. Yeah, there's a lot of signatures in here, but that's the one that he signed. And the date on it is 5/15/2004, Charlotte, North Carolina. We were at a conference there. Exactly 2 years later to the date, 5/15/06, I was at his funeral, at his memorial service.
Oh
So there are,
wow.
you know, there's a lot of that you can say, at the end of the day, it's just commonalities and things like that. But there are so many of those that are related with Amityville that at the end of all of that, you got to say, there's something more here.
Right,
So,
right.
right?
There's a lot. So, in fact, I even had. So I've been. It seems like every other podcast I do, I end up back to Amityville for some reason. I don't know
Hmm.
how I end up getting back to Amityville, but that's where I am. Um,
Yeah.
and just I want to say it was about 5 nights ago. My husband and I were in bed, we're sleeping, and he keeps his cell phone in the living room. And at
Hmm.
3:22 in the morning, all of a sudden, this music, loud music, just starts playing from the living room.
Hmm.
We both wake up. He's like, "What is going on?" And goes into the living room, and the Pandora app has just started playing on his phone at full blast. And it was at the beginning of a song, and he just hit pause and went back. We went back to bed. Well, the
Mm.
next day we looked at. I said, "What time did that even start?" Now I have a snore tracker because he claims that I snore, and I'm trying to prove him wrong. So I have this thing that picks up the snores in the night, you know?
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah.
I was able to go back to my recorder to see what time that the phone went off, and it was at about 3:22 a.m.
Hmm.
Um, and the song that was playing was called Horizon by the band Pussifer. And
Mm.
if you're not familiar with Pussifer, it's one of Maynard is the lead singer of Tool, and he does a lot of like side projects. He's in a bunch of different
Mm.
bands, A Perfect Circle, and Pussifer is another one. Um,
Okay.
so Maynard often does like 7 minute songs with a lot of lyrics, but this particular song, very short lyrics, and very appropriate to be randomly playing in the middle of the night at 3:22 a.m. right before I'm going to talk to Tim Yancey about George
Hmm.
Lutz and the Amityville Horror, right?
Yeah.
So, I can't help but feel like even just some deep and spending hours doing a lot of research into Amityville can even
Hmm.
get you a little. You're dipping your toe where you probably shouldn't be dipping your toe.
Absolutely. And you're not the first person to say that. I have been very careful about how I treat this thing called Amityville. There are people who have become obsessed with Amityville. You've heard of obsession and
Oh yeah,
possession,
oh yeah,
this and that. Well, I'll tell you what, there have been people out there who have become absolutely obsessed with this. They can tell you the time that somebody woke up, that when they were at the boathouse, the middle name of the person who built the house, all this stuff. And, you know, there comes a point for me when there has to be a practical and a realistic explanation of what happened there. And all of the detail, like the 315 thing that we're
yeah.
talking about. George always said that sometime he would wake up in the middle of the night, have to go to the bathroom, usually around 3:15, 3:30, somewhere around in there, and that was that. Ronald Defeo, according to the autopsies, they guesstimated that those murders probably occurred around the same time, sometime
Hmm.
between 3:30. So it's the movie folks get a hold of a thing like that, and all of a sudden it becomes such an important part of the puzzle. They would wake up every night at 3:15 in the morning, that kind of thing. And that's not what happened, but it's such a part of the legend now that
Right.
it's really hard. And people hear that, and it was in the movie, but they created that. There was a lot of creative license and a lot of embellishment, not only in the movie, but in the book itself. Jay
Right.
Anson had a heck of a time trying to figure out how to make a timeline of what happened. Even George and Kathy didn't know what particular day something happened or what particular time or any of that. They did the best they could.
Of
What they
course.
did was they actually created cassette tapes, just like with William Weber. They created cassette tapes and they sent them to Jay Anson, who then created the novel. Jay was actually a best-selling. He did war documentaries or war novels,
Right,
fictional
right.
novels. Yeah, and that's what he was doing. And then he got this book, and that's how he decided to do it. He put at the beginning of the chapter, there was a calendar date. This happened. And then the next calendar date, this happened. And nobody can say for sure whether those are correct or not. I think that he
Right.
used a lot of creative license in that. And so did the movie.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be fair, that's what they're going to do with I think, anybody's true
Yeah.
story, whether it's a haunting or not, just for the sake of hooking an audience, right?
Sure.
Right.
Well, ask Andrea Perron. What
Oh,
happened
yeah.
to her the first time she watched that movie? She said, I broke down and cried the first time that she saw that movie because there were so many inaccuracies in it. Um, you think about that movie, oh my God, what was it? It was the one where the bodies were, maybe it was Andrea's, where they were in it. No, it was Carmen Snedeker. Remember that movie they did on her and the bodies were in the
In the
walls and all
walls,
that?
yeah.
Yeah, come on, So of course it's not exactly an accurate portrayal. There's creative license used in this. Well, in 1970, nobody knew that, and it said Amityville Horror, a
A
true
true
story.
story.
Right. And they didn't realize, one of the things that the family that moved in later, the Cromartys, said was that, well, they talked about how in the movie the tree smashed through the eye-like windows and the tree limb tried to grab the kids and all this. Oh, well, that never happened because here's the original windows. And they took the reporters up and they showed them the original quarter moon windows that were in there. And they said, there's no damage to these. These are the original windows. Well, George and Kathy never said that the windows were broken. That was in the movie.
Right.
And people would come out and go, well, I'm a paranormal investigator. I'm an expert in this. I'm going to write a book. This is nonsense. That never happened. They talked about and showed in the movie the door blasting off of the hinges and crashing out into the yard, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
They never said that happened. They said they would be awake or sleeping upstairs. And they would hear a noise downstairs. It would be a slam. The door would slam, very distinctive sound. They'd get up, run down there, door shut. The dog's laying there sleeping. Harry, their dog, was laying there sleeping right next to it. But it had been that sound. That translated into the door smashing off of the hinges,
Right.
Um, so there's a lot of tellers of the story. And the thing that I wanted to do and tried to do with the Shock Docs video was to give George a chance, his voice, his story. Here's what happened.
So now, did George was was George into the occult, or did did he did he have an interest in the paranormal before he bought the house?
Depends who you ask. There are some of the kids to this day will say that he was really into all of that occult stuff, that they would hear them saying and practicing like mantras and things like that. George told me that he really had no interest in that. He was a motorcycle guy. He built boats. He
Gearhead.
worked on cars. Yeah. He loves cars, those kind of things. He said he didn't really have an interest in paranormal stuff. What they had done was when they moved into the house, they started taking a transcendental meditation class. That was something new back in the 70s. They were interested in it, learning to meditate.
And
And
you
that
use a
there were
mantra.
yes. So the kids would hear that and they didn't know what was going on, So that was his
Wow.
explanation. He
Yeah,
said he had never heard anything about the paranormal, never cared about the paranormal.
that's amazing. So,
Yeah.
okay, now when they bought the house and they were given the opportunity to purchase the furniture as well, why did they choose? Did he ever explain to you why they chose to take the furniture along with the house including the headboards that belonged to the kids.
Well, his exact words was, "It was good stuff." That's exactly what he said to me. He said that there was some furniture in there. They didn't keep all of it. They kept the frames. The mattresses, of course, were taken
gone.
away.
Yeah.
Those were part of an investigation. All of that stuff had been cleaned up. But the headboards were still laying there. All the furniture was in the house. They didn't have a lot of furniture because they were living in a smaller house. George and Kathy both had separate houses. They lived apart. And the idea was Kathy was going to move into George's house. They were going to sell that one and then go looking for the new home for the new marriage. And then they would sell off George's home. Those two houses, Kathy sold for about $32,000 or $34,000. So did George's. And that was, the big house was only $80,000. So there's this rumor around about how they couldn't afford it and stuff. They had already paid for it pretty much. I mean,
yeah.
They had a mortgage and they were paying the mortgage, but they had the money. It was not a problem for them. And when Kathy saw the house at 112 Ocean Avenue, she just fell in love with it. And she described the house as charming. She said it had a very charming manner about it, which is kind of weird. But the first bank they went to, Columbia Savings and Loans, gave them a mortgage right away. They moved in. George had a successful land surveying business, and there was no problem as far as the idea that they couldn't afford the house, and that's why they created all of this.
Right.
Yeah.
So now in the documentary, words is hard.
They are
For real.
verbiage.
Right. On day 28, I believe, they claimed that Kathy levitated and that the boys' beds levitated. Is that something that you heard from George?
Yeah. The description of him talking about that last night is a conversation that him and I had in Virginia. We had done a talk somewhere. We had investigated a haunting. Some folks had come to a conference that we had done, and their kid was terrified to sleep in her room at night. That led to a 2-week investigation there. And while we were there, I was asking. He'd never talked about the last night ever to anyone. He was going to talk to Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM. And he did the interview with him as Art was finally kind of retiring and winding up his career. And George said, well, I've never got to talk to you about this stuff, and I wanted to talk to you about it. You're leaving the air soon. And he was going to tell the story of that last night. But Art kept kind of changing the conversation and asking different questions, and he never had the shot to do it. So I asked him, I said, hey, you got to talk about it, man. And he only went so deep down the rabbit hole. And then he said, that's it. I'm not going to talk about this stuff because there's real repercussions that can occur from it. That night, they had gone to bed. The boys were upstairs. Missy was in her room. And he was laying down, and he said he woke up to find that he couldn't move, that he was like in a paralysis state. He wasn't able to move, couldn't talk, couldn't speak. And he was just kind of laying there with his eyes open. He could hear sounds of people moving outside in the hallway, outside the bedroom door, which was closed. And they could see figures under the door walking back and forth. They could see the shadows walking from the door crack at the bottom there. Right. He said Harry, who was their black lab at the time, the dog, they had brought him up there because they wanted him to be right there. And they had tied him to the doorknob, taken his leash and put it on the doorknob. And Harry would get up and he would get sick and he would throw up and he would walk in circles and kind of lay down again. And then he'd get up and he'd get sick again. At one point, Kathy slowly levitated only 4 or 5 inches off the bed. It wasn't like she was way up there, just 4 or 5 inches off the bed, and had started to float slowly away from him toward the wall on her side, and that he wasn't able to do anything.
Because he was still in that paralysis state.
Yeah, he was absolutely unable to move, couldn't talk. At one point, he made a sound that he described. He said, I can only describe it as a low moaning wail that came up from inside of me. And at the same time, I said, it's in Chris's room. It's in Chris's room. He could hear the boys' beds slamming up and down above them on the ceiling, but he could not get up. At one point, something came in and got on the mattress and sat down on the bed. And there was an entity of some type that was there.
Uh-huh.
And that's when he was able to kind of sit up and reach over and grab Kathy and pull her back toward him, toward the bed. That's kind of when that was the end of it. He wasn't going to talk about anything else that had happened there. But he said that when the boys came down the next morning and everybody was waking up from that, they were like, what the hell was that just happened? You know, and they called Father Ray, Father Ralph Pecoraro, who was the priest that was portrayed in the movies. Father Ray knew just the right way to say it to them, and he used just the right words to make George even consider that he was going to leave his house. And he said, look, can't you just go somewhere just for a couple of days? Just get out of the house. Just go and just stay out of there for a couple of days, you know? And so they made a decision that they were going to go to Kathy's mom's house. They started the event, and this was all happening like noon, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that they started the process of trying to get a couple of changes of clothes in the car, because they were coming back as far as he was concerned. So they only took a few items, got in the car. The van wouldn't start. It had one of those little switches that you have to hit. You know, you open the hood, and there was a little switch there, and he had to press it, and he got back in. The car started right up. And on the way to Kathy's mom's house, he recalled that they were getting tossed around on the road a little bit, and that there was some banging sounds and things that were coming from the outside of the van. So, and the idea of just trying to leave the house was such a weird thing to them, that, you know, this is our home. What are we leaving for? But they had no choice. And the idea was to get the house fixed and come back. You know, you get a plumber or something when the plumbing goes bad. Well, they didn't know anybody that dealt with ghosts. And Laura Didio, who was in the documentary, is the one that introduced them to Ed and Lorraine. There were a couple people before them. Kaplan was one. There were a few others. And once they got there, they really kind of weren't the people that George was interested in having an investigation with. Kaplan described himself as a vampirologist, and there's pictures that are out there on the internet. If you Google this guy's name, of him sitting on the bed, and there's a picture of Bela Lugosi behind him, and he's got a stake and a hammer, and he's got a briefcase with a piece of duct tape on it that says vampirologist on it. So,
yeah,
there were a couple of really big personalities who first showed up, and they were like, I don't know about this. Laura Didio introduced them to Ed and Lorraine Warren, and then later on, she was involved with the Hans Holzer investigation that occurred later as well. And Ed and Lorraine told George, we can't fix this. We can't fix it. I'm sorry. You know, to bring somebody in here and to try to do a house blessing based on what they learned that night of the psychic slumber party there, they said, we're not going to ask anybody to do that because we're asking them to endanger their lives. So now what do you do with a house that you just moved into? You can't live in it. People are telling you can't live in it and that they can't fix this. Are you going to sell it to somebody else? And they decided, we can't do that. We cannot sell this house to somebody else. They kept that house another 6 months, paying the mortgage, which is another proof that it wasn't an issue where they couldn't afford the house.
Money, right.
They paid that for an additional 6 months, and then finally they gave the house back. They gave it back to the bank, and they moved out to California, and that's where they stayed for a long time. Kathy eventually moved out to Scottsdale, Arizona, had a ministry there that fed thousands of people. George became a very devout Catholic, and worked with the soup kitchens and stuff that were out there. He eventually settled in Las Vegas and passed away in 2006.
Did the children all stay with Kathy?
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm talking to you right now.
For some reason I'm not hearing you. Hold on. Let me try something.
I am
Give me just a minute. I'll
talking.
fix
Okay.
this. All right, let's try that. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Nope. I have lost you.
It's freaking
Audio-wise, and
Amityville.
I don't know why.
It's
Should we
Amityville.
continue this another time? For some reason,
Yes.
see, this is what they call the Amityville curse. For some reason, I just totally lost all of your sound. Let me try it one more time. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Nope, I lost you.
All right. Well, we're gonna here.
You're gonna
let
have
me,
to write questions on index cards.
Here we go. I'm gonna hit them up in chat. Everybody, just bear with me here. Crumb. I am so sorry this is happening.
Just so you know, I'm logging back into Facebook if you want to send me a message.
Oh, I was gonna.
For some reason, I have lost all the audio. Oh, I see it. It says we'll finish later. Okay.
Yes.
So let me just wrap up real quick with a quick thing. George is somebody who worked really hard toward the end of his. He didn't speak about Amityville forever. That family was silent. They kind of quietly moved out of the public eye once those movies came out, and nobody heard from them. And it was only toward the last about 5 years of his life that he decided to kind of step out there and speak again about Amityville. And he is somebody who kind of created a template out there for how we handle modern day violent haunting scenarios. People like Andrea Perrone, Stephen LaChance, myself, Carmen Snedeker, all of us who are violent haunting survivors have been quietly behind the scenes working on a template for what makes it happen, how do we get rid of it, what are the catalysts, how does this stuff happen, and he was one of the first people who had started to put some of that stuff together and create that template for us. I'm sorry, what's your question again? Oh, you're back. I hear you now.
Wait, you can hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, I was
I
typing
don't
my
know what
questions
happened.
in chat. So did my final question, because we were just gonna wrap up, was
Okay.
did George, Kathy, or any of the children become artists or sell artwork?
I have no idea. I cannot answer that question. I don't know.
And I think you can see in chat why I'm asking. I
Yeah.
found a painting at a flea market, and it's signed Lutz. That's the
You have
artist
it?
name. I can go grab a picture of it and
Go
show it to
grab.
you.
I'll look
I'll
at the
be right
signature.
back. It's gonna blow your
Sure.
mind. Well, the signature,
Okay.
it's just printed. It's just like painted on, but
Okay.
it's the content of the. I'll be right back.
Go ahead. While she's gone, we'll sit here and stare at the bookcase. No, I had a lot of fun though. While she's getting the painting, I can tell you I had a lot of fun going out to California and working with the crew that I did. I was really blessed because a lot of the people who were in the documentary are people who were actually there at the time of the murders. Jeff Bellinger, who did some interviews with George as well. They used some of his material out there, old archives from the Lou Gentili show, and lots of sources for some of the stuff that was used in that. All right, hit me
All
with
right.
it.
So what I did, I took a picture.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see it,
Uh-huh.
but it's at the top of it. It says the loony bin.
Oh, wow.
Can you see it? Let me
Yeah,
send it to you in
abnormal.
Messenger. And it says the
Okay.
loony bin. Here, let me get it back up there. Odd things tend to occur here. Abnormality is the normality
At this locality.
at this locality. And
Wow.
then the signature is You're probably not going to be able to see it on my phone. Technology, folks. Sky,
Right?
tell you.
Well,
If I could get that out of there, I could show you the signature. Damn it. I couldn't take the whole thing off the wall because I've got it tacked up, but it's painted on tin.
it's
It's
like
like a
just
sheet
a
of tin.
printed.
No, it's
Okay.
painted on. It's all painted.
Is it? Well, I'll
And
show
I
you this. This is some of his handwriting. So I will take a picture of that and text it to you as well, so that you can try to compare it.
well, like I said, it's not a cursive signature. It's in print.
Right, but he wrote some stuff up in here,
Oh,
some of
yeah.
it
You know
in
what?
his regular handwriting, and I've got some more of that stuff around here somewhere. So
Did
I'll send
well
it to you.
while you were out traveling, did he doodle or did he sketch?
No,
Did he?
you know who was an artist was Ed Warren. Ed Warren used to go out and paint houses. That was his gig. That's how he got into haunted places. He would be
Really?
interested about a certain place that he had heard was haunted, and he would go out with Lorraine and set up his easel and start painting the house on canvas. And the people would come out and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And that was how he got in to investigate a lot of these houses. That was kind of his trick to get in. Say, "Here, let me give you this painting of your house, and hey, I've heard that maybe there's something going on here." Why, yes, there is, and then that conversation would take place.
I kind of think there was a little bit of that in the trailer that I saw for the new Conjuring. The Devil Made Me Do
Oh,
It,
okay.
where they show him
Okay.
drawing the house outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
I
I'm
don't
looking
know
forward.
that George was a painter, but I will ask Danny and Chris and them and see if I can find out for you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, it has a copyright number, and I
Mhm.
can't read all the digits, so I've tried to Google search what I think the digits could be, and
Mhm.
nothing's coming up. So I don't know if it's a true Lutz painting. I mean, they're not the only Lutzes in the world, so but you also see what it says, right? So it's like
Yeah.
it's kind of not to
It's
mention.
very aligned, we'll
Yes.
say.
Well, yeah, because I mean they were right on the river, so with the
Yeah.
dot or the loon, I guess it is. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, while you can still hear me, I think we should probably wrap up. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy man, and I know that you don't necessarily like to get on these topics very often. So I am blessed, and I thank you so much. Um, was there anything else that you could throw out there? Any little bits of gold that we could get?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, let me say thank you. And for
Oh,
you,
sure.
anytime. I think I did like your third episode.
Yeah.
I don't remember. It's been a while, but it was like episode number 3 comes to mind for some reason. So anytime you want to talk, I'd be happy to come on. Um, when it comes to Amityville, you have to take it into context and understand. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Okay. Take it into context and understand that there are a lot of people who had their finger in the pie when it comes to Amityville. And you have the version of what happened that is told by the family, and then you have the Hollywood version, and then you have the book version, and then you have the Ryan Reynolds version, and then you have this version. There's been dozens and dozens of books written about the Amityville Horror.
Yes.
People say it's the most famous haunting in America. It's the most famous haunting in the
In the
world.
world.
In the world, hands
Yeah.
down. They did a survey in different countries when the movie came out. 8 out of 10 people in the planet have heard something about the Amityville Horror. So, it's a big story. And to be able to attach yourself to that, as some of the folks who tried to expose it as a hoax, if you can say, well, I have firsthand information here, that makes you a pretty big deal in the paranormal world. So, take it, see what rings true for you. I'm going to put up, Maria, I tell you what, I'm going to put up the 28-minute film that George and I created together, and it's all him talking. It's all personal, private photographs, and him telling what happened in that house. And I'm going to put that up on my website, and I will send you a link to it. Okay, so
That
that
would
you
be
guys can have
fabulous.
first shot at it there. Okay.
I appreciate that. I will definitely put the
Yeah.
link when I post the show. Um, my last question was, did the Lutzes feel like they had an attachment? Did the entity seem like it followed them, or did it seem like it stayed at the house?
Yeah. Um, George explained that he called it a half-life, that the further away you got from it, the lesser the effects were, but that there was always reminders along the way. They eventually went, the Archbishop of Canterbury had a meeting with them when they were over in London or England for promoting the film. And George called it more of a blessing, but they called it an exorcism, and that he performed that for them. And he said that was probably the first and only time that he felt like he was free of this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And how many years later was that?
I don't remember. I know they talk about it in the Shock
Yeah.
documentary, but that's slipped my mind. I
Okay.
don't recall exactly when it was.
But it wasn't immediately afterwards, that's for sure.
No, no.
Because it
This
was
is once the
after
movie
him and
came out.
Kathy had split, and yeah.
Yeah, this is once the movie had come out, and they were going around trying to help them promote that film.
Excellent. All right, Tim, thanks again for your time and for your insight. It's always a pleasure. I'm a huge fan. Give
Well, thank you.
Trish a big hug for me. I love her as well.
Absolutely.
And
She's on that side of the room over there doing a class right now. So,
hi, Trish.
hi. But anything I can do for you ever, you call me and I'm here. Okay?
I
I
thank you so much,
appreciate
my
you.
friend. I appreciate you. And until the next episode, stay scared.